My name is Dan McKivergan, Vice President for Government Relations at Hudson Institute. Welcome to today's conversation with Mark Salter about his new book, The Luckiest Man, Life with John McCain. Mark served as Senator McCain's on McCain's staff for 20 years, and most of the time as Chief of Staff. He was also a senior advisor to the 2000 and 2008 presidential campaigns and collaborated with Senator McCain on 7 books, including Faith Among Fathers and Worth the Fighting For. Mark, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Good to be here with you.
I guess my first question would be, why did you decide to write this book, and how did you go about it, given the scope of his life?
Yeah, well, it's there were points while I was writing, I thought maybe this will have to be a multi-volume memoir / biography, but I think I've nearly exhausted the McCain franchise, having written 7 books with him, and but I wanted to be able to not just give sort of a summary account of his entire life, but offer sort of eyewitness testimony to the kind of public servant he was. There hadn't been anything like that, except much smaller, obviously shorter journalistic pieces. But I knew him pretty well. Saw his strengths and his few weaknesses, and I knew he before he died, when we had published the last book we collaborated together on. He had told the New York Times, when they had asked him, "Who do you want to write your biography?" He'd said Mark Salter. So I took that as a charge, and I probably started working on it not that long after he died, probably 4 or 5, 6 months after he died. I started working on it, and it ended up being a little bit longer than I thought it would be, and it was a hard life to pick and choose incidents from, to recall. But it was I guess in a weird kind of way, it was a way to keep him close after he had died for a couple of years.
How did you decide on the title?
Well, that's how he viewed himself, as you know, Dan, having worked for him for years. He said over and over again, right up until the last moments on Earth, "I'm the luckiest man you'll ever meet," and he meant that not just because he had survived, half a dozen near brushes with death, and a difficult imprisonment, and a couple of tricky moments in a political career, and a few defeats here and there, but he thought the life he got to lead was by sort of sacrificing and serving others, having courage and sacrificing for others, that the life that led him to lead was just about the greatest life anybody could live, and that service sort of redeemed him from what he recognizes the deficiencies of his own character, and that's why he felt so lucky, and he meant it, and he chanted it like a mantra. He said, "5th from the bottom of my class at the Naval Academy, and the Republican nominee for president." Unbelievable, and I heard him say that 1,000 times if I heard him say it once.
One of the interesting nuggets you have in the book was that one of his first deployments in the Navy, in the fleet, was actually to enforce the quarantine that President Kennedy had implemented against Cuba, which that was one of his first kind of upfront battles, of the time.
Yeah, it was one of the earlier he was in the Atlantic Fleet then, and not only flying, A1s at the time, which were prop planes, but off a carrier, but he was busy qualifying as an officer of the deck, so he could stand a watch sometimes, which he was a guy that, had a lot of interests, and they had just returned, from their most recent Mediterranean deployment, and they had just come back, and they had barely, I think he had a beach house in Virginia Beach or sometime, and before he could even get settled in, they were all called back to the ship and went out to sea and steamed south. And it wasn't until, I think, Cherry Point or something, where they were all the officers were called into the wardroom, and they listened to President Kennedy's speech, piped in, announcing the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, I think was it the Enterprise, if I recall?
I believe it was at that time. Yeah.
Um,
I think it was
one
the
of the
first,
other
I
interesting
think it was because that was the first nuke, the first
new
nuclear.
nuclear submarine, no nuclear carrier.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that's right.
And it was the first to get there. They were the first to get on
On
station.
station, and I think it was like for there a few months, couple months, right?
Yeah, yeah, and of course McCain being McCain, when you're asking about the tensions of it, he talked about, well, after it was over, I got to deploy, I got some carrier on board, whatever they call those pods that they
Yeah.
lift guys on and off carriers on, he for some R&R in Jamaica, it's like, I had a great time in Jamaica.
Oh boy, yeah, I can imagine. You before you became chief of staff to Senator McCain, you were very involved with the effort to normalize relations with Vietnam.
Yeah.
You have a very interesting chapter in there about John McCain's relationship with the then Vietnamese foreign minister, who was very interested in closer ties to the United States,
Yeah.
even though many others in his government wanted closer ties to China.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how the normalization process came about?
Sure.
And today I don't think people realize how contentious it really was.
Yeah.
And now in retrospect, given the challenge we have in East Asia,
Yeah.
having Vietnam as where they are now politically and ports of calls that are Navy is doing and so on and so forth is an important to our efforts.
Yeah. Well, I wrote about it at length because it was really, I was his foreign affairs aide before I became his administrative assistant or chief of staff. And it really was one of my favorite memories of that time. I thought it was one of a major accomplishment, which wouldn't have happened, or at least not on that timetable, but for him. And I mean, he worked very closely with John Kerry on it, but it was the political cover that he provided Bill Clinton and made that possible. And it began really 10 years after the war. He returned to Vietnam with Walter Cronkite for the 10th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, the end of the Vietnam War. And, he got interested in seeing if there's some way to sort of, well, at that time he was contemplating interest sections. I think by 1988, he and Tom Ridge, I think, were recommending open interest sections in each other's countries and take the first, small steps towards normalization. Remember, we didn't just not have diplomatic relations. We had a complete embargo on them, which was, quite a heavy imposition on them and really stunted their growth, obviously. They had, in 1986, the Vietnamese Politburo had instituted economic reforms called Due Moi, where they started letting Vietnamese peasants have long leases on their land and keep most of their profits instead of turning all their crops over to the government and everything like that. But they started to liberalize their economy, and Vietnam instantly went from I think the year after those reforms were made, they went from a near rice famine in Vietnam to being the third largest rice exporter in the world. So they were interested in opening up. Obviously, they'd fought a border war with China, had a little to do with Cambodia, but even more to do with sort of ancient, traditional hostilities between, whenever you went to Vietnam with McCain or anybody else, you always got treated to these very lengthy history lectures from every government official about all the invaders they've repelled over the millennia, so he was, Nguyen Co Thach was the Vietnamese official, their foreign minister that you referenced. He was known to be anti-China, I guess, more worried about China and viewed, for a host of reasons, worked very hard at trying to build a relationship with the United States. He'd get very frustrated because the politics in this country were such after, the only war we lost, and that, it was never as forthcoming as moving along as quickly as Thach wanted it to. But he and McCain, for some reason, just sort of hit it off. I went with John, I think in 91 or 90 or 91, the first time I went with him to Vietnam, and was still we had no relationships there. But as we were going in, he got a call from somebody in the State Department, the Asia Bureau, Ken Quinn, I think, and who said, we're about to go to New York, because the Vietnamese, the only diplomatic representation they had in the country at that time in our country was at the UN. So their mission at the New York, we're about to go to New York to brief the Vietnamese on a roadmap to a better relationship, which involved three things. One, they had to commit to getting out and staying out of Cambodia, which they had invaded. And they had to cooperate more and sort of in our search for answers on MIAs, and allow essentially an American military presence in Hanoi that would investigate crash sites and try to close some of these MIA cases. And if they took and there were multiple steps, but very slowly, if they did all these things, we would lift the trade embargo someday and restore diplomatic relations. McCain himself insisted that they add the release of re-education camp detainees who were still being held civilian and military officials in the South who were still being held all those years after the war, which now would have been 15 years. And so the State Department, McCain said yes. They asked McCain to sort of discuss it with the Vietnamese when we were in Hanoi, and he did, and he sort of felt obliged. He agreed with the process and felt obliged to move it along. So he felt we had made a commitment. When the Vietnamese complained about it, TOC was very upset. We've already done all these things, and they had done quite a bit by then. And yet we get nothing, in return. This will be years down the road now. And but McCain sort of counseled patience, and they struck up a relationship. And with his deputy, Lei Mai, and working with John Kerry, where they sort of moved the process, along, and made sure that the U.S. government kept its word while the Vietnamese kept their word. And as part of sort of preparing, of dealing with the politics of normalization, which was quite a contentious decision at the time, Bob Dole and George Mitchell, who were the majority and minority leaders then in the Senate, formed a special committee on POW MIA affairs and appointed John Kerry as the chairman, and Bob Smith, who was quite a advocate who believed that the Vietnamese were still holding prisoners of war, as the Republican minority, a ranking Republican on the committee. McCain was a member of that committee. He was quite a skeptic. He never believed that the Vietnamese were holding POWs, as he explained to me once. This is a very long answer I'm giving you, Dan. He always thought the Vietnamese could be quite cruel. He had personal experience of that, and he had no illusions about that. But he did not. He said, "I never knew him to be capricious. There was nothing in it for them to be holding Americans. All that would have possibly done is brought Americans back into the war." And he said that, but nevertheless, he thought there was a combination of wishful thinking, which was understandable on the part of the families, sort of unvanquished hopes that they would be reunited with missing loved ones, but also that those families were preyed upon by what he viewed as con artists and, Rambo wannabes. And it was a very contentious year-long process, but eventually everybody, including Bob Smith, signed a report that said there's no compelling evidence that Americans remain in captivity in Vietnam. And go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, and then so that led then to, I guess it was with 1995, where we have the normalization ceremony. Yeah. At the same time, 95 and then through the late 90s, you have, the violence in the Balkans, Al-Qaeda stepping up attacks on American targets and other hotspots around the world. You talk about Senator McCain giving a speech in 1999, where you describe it as a reformulation of the Reagan doctrine.
Yeah.
Can you explain that, and also the kind of the larger question, what people get right about John McCain's view of foreign policy and what they get wrong?
Sure. Let me, if I can, if you'll allow me, let me just put a few final thoughts offer a few final thoughts on Vietnam normalization, though. It's because there was, it was a long process. As McCain really worked on it for close to 5 years, and I remember the most poignant memory I have of it is, it was very difficult to convince a lot of Clinton advisors that this was a smart thing for Clinton to do politically. He obviously had evaded the draft, and some of his political advisors thought veterans would really be very angry about this. They would, protest the decision and all that. John didn't believe that would happen, but he knew he had to convince Clinton to do it. And it all came down to a meeting in the Oval Office after there were multiple meetings involving Clinton and many others, and Veteran Service Organization stuff, but a small final meeting with Clinton, Kerry, McCain, and a few aides, including me, in which McCain Kerry gave sort of a very lawyerly, cogent brief on why this was the right decision for Clinton to make, and McCain just looked at him and said, "I'm tired of looking back and I don't care anymore who was for or against the war. I'm tired of looking back in anger, and I'm tired of this country looking back in anger. So if you move forward, Mr. President, I'll back you 100%." And it was just one of those moments, which I'm sure you experienced, where you're just so proud to work for the guy. It was such a disinterested, action that would cause him a little heartburn, with a little political trouble, but that he did because it was in the best interest of his country. And, it's just, it's why it remains such a favorite memory of mine. But anyway.
It's a fascinating part of the book. And there's a really interesting history there too. So that's why I wanted to talk about it more, because I don't think people quite understand exactly what went into it, but also the personalities involved, and it didn't have to end up that way.
No, it did not.
It
would eventually happen, but it would have been a much longer timetable. Yeah. Who knows what the direction, how that would have affected the politics in Hanoi.
Exactly. Yeah.
And now we've got, as you mentioned, we've got this very warm relationship, a very strong trading relationship and a strong diplomatic relationship that allows, port calls of the U.S. Navy ships in Cam Bay, which, you would have never thought, 20 years ago you'd see the day, but they're on board, the project to make sure that China doesn't dominate the Pacific Rim, and that's obviously in the United States' #1 strategic interest right now. So you can see, why the relationship is so important. The speech you referenced was euphemistically referred to as the rogue state rollback speech, and I think in that instance, it was mostly a speech about using soft power to roll back, to support opposition to some of the, most heinous dictatorial regimes in the world, who also happen to be U.S. adversaries. And McCain always had a much more, I think people shorthand McCain as, he's a hawk. He's a hawk. He was a strong pro-defense guy, no doubt about it. And he wasn't averse to using force when he thought force was the right way to go. But people forget that almost the first splash he made as a congressman, not even in the Senate, was opposition to Reagan's deployment of the Marines to Beirut, because he realized, that they were sitting ducks and too small a number to affect any positive change in the situation there. This is in 1983, I think. So he was a freshman House member, about as junior gets, and he opposed it. And he was right. Tragically, 200 and some Marines were killed not long after. He had made a big speech opposing that and voting against their deployment. But he always, he did believe in advancing American values. He believed self-government was the only moral government, and every human being on earth was entitled to it. So it mattered to him, he couldn't stand to see people oppressed. He hated bullies. He hated, he despised Vladimir Putin, for instance, and, he wanted to be supportive of, whatever efforts could improve or advance the liberties of people the world over. That wasn't, as as his critics would allege, like, let's send in the Marines every time he wants to do something. I mean, that, really came about during Iraq and Afghanistan, I guess, and when he was a outspoken advocate of the surge. Long before, mind you, there was even a informal debate in the Bush administration about a surge. In August of 2003, McCain was advocating something very much like the surge, and it would be, 2007 before there actually was one. And, but he was mostly about, the United States identifying with the oppressed, identifying with the opponents to dictators, speaking up for them. He always talked about Scoop Jackson, whom he had known when he was in the Navy and the Navy's liaison officer to the Senate. He had traveled with Jackson, and he remembered how Jackson would be greeted by refuseniks in Israel, and how they would tell stories about how they heard Jackson. And then later Reagan, Natan Sharansky would tell him how when he was in the Gulag, they would get word of things Reagan said about them, and McCain thought that was that was the responsibility of an American statesman. So that's really the genesis of that. And I think unfairly just got a short, sort of unfairly characterized as McCain being just belligerent. It wasn't. He just human rights mattered to him, and he wanted to do.
Yeah, something. No, I think there are a lot of, you recount a lot of overseas trips that he made. I think he was literally on every continent, including Antarctica.
Yeah.
And he would go with his, with the different colleagues, Senator Lieberman, Graham, Hillary Clinton, Chris Murphy, throughout his life. And I do remember that he was always wanted to bring as many people as possible to these different regions. Right. So they could see and talk to the people on the ground.
Yeah.
How do you think those interactions overseas impacted his view of America's role in the world?
Well, he talked about probably the last great overseas experience he had. I mean, his last two great causes were Syria and Ukraine, and his last two great foreign causes. And he talked about the Maidan. He was at the Maidan, and spoke there. It was one of the most moving experiences he ever had. And he thought, we're the leader of the free world. That doesn't mean we're just the leader of a military alliance. We're the leader of Western liberalism, and we're supposed to. This is supposed to matter to us, it's in the sort of populist / isolationism that's affecting quarters of the Republican Party now. That's anathema to McCain.
Yeah.
Not doing that, not supporting freedom around the world was amoral. You wouldn't be an American statesman worthy of the name statesman or American, if he did.
Yeah, no, I think the Ukraine, I think he was he with Senator Murphy, I think, on that?
He was, the Maidan.
Yeah.
He talked about the first night he went there, and they stood in the trade building. I don't even think the building's still standing, but he looked down on the square from this building. They were in some trade building, and he said, there were like 500,000 to 1 million people, and all holding up their phone lights at night, and he said it was just tremendously moving.
How could it not be?
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to, we're talking about some of the Senate colleagues. There's a lot of different bills and discussion you have about John McCain's relationship with Ted Kennedy.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to just talk about that a little.
Sure.
They certainly had sharp disagreements.
Yes.
On different issues, but they also worked together on HMO reform, immigration reform, national service.
Right.
And you write that over time, their relationship deepened. Can you talk a little bit about his relationship with Ted Kennedy and why it deepened over the years?
Well, they both shared a zest for political combat,
Yeah.
and they sort of enjoyed mixing it up on the Senate floor.
We have that one colorful
Yeah,
exchange they
yeah.
had.
Were you working in the office then when that happened?
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I was doing the national service and a little bit of the other
yeah,
one. So
yeah.
we were
But that was,
Senator. Yeah, it
yeah,
was interesting.
it was a fight between two other senators, a brand new freshman Democrat and I think Don Nichols on the Republican side. That
Yeah,
both of them were on the floor for other reasons, and they just they sort of watched these two and thought, well, let's jump in, and it became a battle between Kennedy and McCain that moved from the realm of recorded remarks to a few exchanges of profanities in the well of the Senate that were overheard by the reporters in the press gallery above. But
yeah.
afterwards they were laughing about it, and
No,
so they did. I think they recognized in each other one as sort of Scots Irish and Catholic Irish, but they both had Irish um, zest for combat, I guess, for brawling, and enjoyed it. McCain had that sort of notorious line he repeated over and over again: "A fight not joined is a fight not enjoyed," and Kennedy felt the same way. And I think they also recognized in each other guys that made the Senate work. That were influential and saw had a realistic view of what government, in our particular system of government, what a Congress can produce. It's rather modest, but that they were committed to making sure it did what it could do to solve the problems of their time. And they were both guys that when they shook hands on a deal or something or made a commitment on a bill, whether it be immigration or whatever, they kept it. I mean, I can remember McCain being very impressed watching Kennedy sort of be harshly critical of some Democrats in a meeting on immigration when they were not being cooperative or not keeping their word on a commitment. He and Russ Feingold for the campaign finance reform received the Profile and Courage Award from the Kennedy Library, and as part of that, the sort of award weekend or whatever it was, there was a private meal in the family's private quarters in the library in Boston, and Kennedy, said something to him there that really, really touched him. And he said, guys like you, we're the guys that stick around. We're the guys that kind of get stuff done, and that's who he wanted to be in the senator. And really up until the very end of his Senate career, when he came back from brain surgery and gave his regular order speech, he was still trying to be that guy. Like, let's recognize that even if we can't have 100%, we can still make progress on our problems. And both of us, both parties have a responsibility to do that here, and he saw Kennedy as one of those guys, and that was sort of, and plus, Kennedy was good company, and McCain loved good company. Yeah.
yeah, no. I think he's very engaging. Another Senate colleague, obviously, is Joe Lieberman, who was very close to. And I know you get this question a lot, but I feel like I have to ask it. I think you know what it's going to be.
Of course.
Is the question of the running mate choice in 2008, and how that decision was made. I know it's been written about and asked a lot about, but I think it would be, you discussed it in your book. I thought it would be a good time just to kind of give a brief kind of behind the scenes, the different thinking at that point in time.
He had decided on Joe Lieberman, who was at that time an independent caucusing with the Democrats, but a former Democrat, had been elected as a Democrat. His last term, he was elected as an independent. But he caucused with the Democrats, and although he and McCain shared on foreign and defense matters, they were very closely aligned. There were differences on a host of domestic policy matters, including important social issues like abortion. And Lieberman's pro-choice, and McCain was pro-life, and the Republican Party is essentially a pro-life party. And but he had decided that it would, remember, I always try to remind people that it was an awful, awful environment to be the Republican nominee for president. That we had 4 years of the Bush administration, and God bless him, we were still fighting wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The war in Iraq particularly had become very unpopular in the country. Katrina had happened, and and the economy wasn't in very good shape, and not long after the political conventions that year, Lehman Brothers would collapse, and and with it, the real estate bubble would burst and the global credit system dry up, and it was just a tough. The wrong track number, I think, at one time was 88 during that campaign, which is, McCain was a maverick Republican, a distinctive Republican, had his differences with the Bush administration. But nevertheless, any Republican, whoever the Democrat was, especially a Democrat who almost personified change in the biggest change election of my lifetime, I think, was going to have an easy time tagging whoever the Republican nominee was, as just George Bush's third term, and so we knew we needed to get a piece of the change message. And McCain said, well, I have a great idea how we can do that. I can ask my pal, Joe Lieberman, a Democrat, to run with me on a unity ticket. We weren't averse to it at the beginning, but we started polling the idea, but then word started to leak out. I think Lindsey Graham might have been one of the chatterboxes that started leaking it to the press. And and we started hearing from, I guess, what euphemistically you could call party elders, who said it would be a disaster, that there would be a challenge to the nomination on the floor. It would be a bloody battle to win it. You might win it, but you would limp out of the Twin Cities with a divided party, a dispirited party, and you would only have added to this, the high degree of difficulty we were already facing. He wasn't persuaded by that, but we eventually did, sort of insist you can't do it. It was, Rick, me, Steve Schmidt, others, you can't do it. If we'd done this, we were going to have to spring it as a surprise, and so he was, sort of unhappy about that, and kind of, to be honest with you, went and sulked for a few days, and it was getting close.
Grudging acceptance.
Yeah.
No, I remember that well. Well. There's so much, in the book, and so many different historical events in his life, and just both politically and personally. And did he ever speak about what he would consider to be his proudest moment in public life?
His proudest moment? Vietnam was one of them. The torture debate, he was very proud of. I think somebody asked me the other day, I can't remember where I was, but they said, what do you think McCain would have said is his proudest accomplishment? And this is going to sound sort of prosaic, I guess, but it's not. He said, I think he would have probably answered the fact that as chairman or ranking member of the Armed Service Committee, we reported the defense authorization bill out by unanimous vote or close to it, passed by a huge margins on the floor, and was signed by the president every year. He probably would have said was what he thought. That's what a senator was supposed to do. He valued his committee assignments. That's where you develop the closest relationships with members of both parties, and where you got most of your accomplishments done. And the fact that that his committee, a lot of committees fail that in this day and age. I mean, I don't think there's been a foreign assistance bill passed on the Foreign Relations Committee in decades, but the defense authorization bill, was done every year, if not unanimously, close to it, and he was very proud of that.
Yeah, no, I know he would, the whole question of earmarks, he obviously was very against pork barrel spending, but the larger point, it wasn't so much the spending, it was the process that was done to circumvent, the rules of the Senate and have the judgment of people who just had more seniority getting more, more precedence over something that maybe someone else should get because they were in greater need. So it really was a process.
It was a process.
Kind of a big picture. It didn't, a lot of people didn't understand that, but that's really what it was about. It was.
He wanted projects to be, sort of determined according to their merit. And I don't know. I think there's a little naivety in that for a guy that was in politics for such a long time. Okay. Cause it's just that ain't human nature, and there's some value in having something to trade for recalcitrant members of Congress who won't do the right thing unless they get something out of it. And earmarks were, handy things, but
well, it's funny because it's funny you mentioned that. I remember, I didn't, when I first arrived and thereafter, we would go down to the floor and criticize different earmarks by different senators, and he always used colorful language. We go back to the office, and he'd be like, hey Dan, why don't we see if that same office will join us on this bill that we want to introduce on on X issue, and I'll be like, boy, we really kind of ripped into them. Maybe I'll wait a week.
Yeah, he like I said, he had a real zest for combat in Senate debates, and
I guess we can just
mockery was a big part of his form of fighting, and that style of fighting, and it wasn't always productive in other ways.
No, but it was definitely entertaining at times, but colorful. So what would you consider, one of his biggest maybe regret in public life over the course of his career? I know there might be a few, but
I think he regretted a lot. He got the last iteration of comprehensive immigration reform passed by a 67 vote margin in the Senate. Boehner, for it was Tea Party problems, in the caucus there, never brought it up. But he used to explain that to me. He said the thing that's so galling about this is it's not like Medicare. This isn't the biggest, most impossible to solve problem we have. This is a modest problem. We can't get but people's lives and livelihoods depend on it. And we can't get this done. Why is this so damn hard? So I know he really regretted that they never got a bill to the president for to sign. But other than that, he regretted Keating. He said it'll be on my tombstone. I know it. He didn't do anything unethical, but he was not heedful of the appearance of it, and he knew it, and he knew it was stupid, and knew it would be part of his obit. And so he regretted that.
Yeah, I believe, and also for the immigration reform, didn't the president? I thought the President Bush supported that.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
The first two bills were both Bush backed, and the last one was Obama backed. And and they did everything. In the case of Obama, because our problem was chiefly with the Republicans, McCain urged the Obama administration to have a light hand in it. Not, they were very involved in it, millions of meetings and everything, and but to not have a heavy political hand. Which would just make it harder to recruit Republican support. But the Bush administration, everybody, Karl Rove, everybody was involved in every aspect of that bill. Working with Kennedy and McCain, who were the primary sponsors. And
Senator Kyle, right?
Senator Kyle opposed the first one, but then in 2007, we got him, we did another one that convinced Kyle to support that one. Made a few changes that he recommended, and he fought like a tiger for it too. It's just it couldn't get passed when you had everybody talks about Jeff Sessions held the line against. He didn't hold the line. We passed a bill by 67 votes. You know how many controversial bills passed by 67 votes in the Senate? None but that one. It's everything's a dogfight. But
I know. It's I'm glad to see the passion still there, Mark. Hey, before we end, I just wanted to note a couple things. You end your book by noting that it was John McCain's idea to invite President Obama and President Bush to speak at his service at the National Cathedral. And here's what you wrote: "What grander gesture of national unity could he have made than by asking the two men who had denied him his highest ambition to speak on his behalf and on behalf of the idea of America they had all served. I mean, you were close to John McCain. How would you, how do you think he would have answered the question, what is the idea of America?
Well, I sort of hinted at it, that it's not, it's, as you always said, it's not a tribe. It's not geographical, I mean, or those aren't the idea of America is that self-government is the only moral government and all humanity is entitled to it. And that everybody had equal dignity on this earth. He had what I talk about McCain's humility. People often think I'm talking about his modesty. I'm not. McCain's humility was, and what I think genuine humility is that he looked at every other person on earth. He felt he had as much dignity as any other person on earth, but not one bit more. And that dignity deserved equal justice, no matter where you lived, and that was the idea, that people could govern themselves in a way that applied the laws equally. That he felt, America, what Lincoln would talk about. When Lincoln talked, we were fighting a civil war, not just to free the slaves or to hold the Union together, but to remain the last best hope of earth. That's the idea of America. I think he served in uniform and in office for 60 years.
And I think that's a good way to end our discussion. Mark Salter, thank you for joining us today, and I hope everyone gets a chance to go purchase this book. It's very interesting. A lot of behind the scenes conversations and details that I actually didn't know and found very interesting. So thank you, and take care of yourself.
Thanks for having me on. You too.